The first time my father forgot me, it wasn't about money or inheritance or the business. It was ice cream. I was 12. My name is Clara Miller, and even now at 33, that memory plays on a loop in my head like a movie I can't turn off. Maybe it's because that's when I learned what I truly meant to my father. Not nothing, but less than someone else. Less than my sister, Julia. Julia was 4 years older than me. Taller, prettier, always with perfect grades and perfect posture. She was the golden one, the daughter my dad adored, and the one my mom silently resented. Dad ran a small auto repair workshop on the edge of town, a dusty space filled with the smell of oil and metal. I loved that smell. I used to sit in the corner after school, legs swinging, watching him fix old engines like they were living things. I thought if I stayed long enough, he might look up and see me. He rarely did. That day, I'd won an award at school, top of my class in math. I had even practiced what I'd say when they called my name. I told Dad the night before, while he was wiping grease off his hands. They said parents can come, I said, smiling. Will you? He looked at me with that half-listening expression he always had when I spoke, somewhere between distracted and disinterested. Mom, exhausted from her night shift at the hospital, perked up and said, She worked hard for that, Nom. You should be there. Dad hesitated. Julia and I already plan to play basketball tomorrow. Mom gave him that look. Then bring Julia with you. She can cheer for her sister. He sighed, nodded, and that was that, or so I thought. The next day, I looked for him in the crowd. Each time a father's face caught my eye, I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe that's him. When my name was called, my heart raced. I walked to the stage, holding my breath, searching every corner. He wasn't there. Later, I texted Mom. She said Dad had left early. His car was gone. He must be on the way. But when I came home, the first sound I heard wasn't the door creaking or the TV. It was shouting. Mom's voice sharp and trembling. You missed it, Nom. She won, and you weren't there. You promised. Dad's low voice tried to sound calm, but cracked at the edges. Julia wanted ice cream. We thought we had time. You what? Mom's voice broke. You skipped your daughter's ceremony for ice cream? Julia stood behind him, holding a cone, not even looking guilty. We were late, she said simply, like it explained everything. I stood there, my certificate still in my hands, its gold edges bending under my fingers. Dad tried to explain, to say it wasn't a big deal, that there would be more awards in the future. But to me, that one moment was the future, and it had already passed. That night, Mom came into my room, sat beside me, and said softly, He doesn't mean to hurt you, Clara. He just doesn't see the way you do. I nodded, but I didn't believe her. That was the night I decided I would make him see me, not with words, but with work. Fast forward 21 years. Dad's workshop is now a company. Our company, at least that's what I thought for most of my adult life. I turned the old place into a thriving business. 35 employees, 15 cars at a time, and contracts with top distributors. Dad still worked on engines. I handled the numbers, the operations, the clients. He called me his assistant, but the truth was, I ran it all. Sometimes I'd glance at him from my office window, his aging hands tightening bolts on a truck, his back slightly hunched, and I'd feel both love and resentment. I had built this empire to earn his respect, yet it still felt like I was 12 again, standing in the hallway, clutching that useless certificate. Julia, meanwhile, had become an accountant in the city. She never liked dirt or oil or anything manual. She used to sneer, You smell like metal, Clara. You're turning into Dad. Funny thing is, she said it like an insult, but to me, it was a badge of honor. Even after all these years, Dad still bragged about her. Julia's got a promotion. Julia's kids are so smart. Julia and her husband just bought a new apartment. And every time, I'd smile politely, pretending it didn't sting, because deep down, I believed, if I just keep working, one day, he'll see that I'm the one who stayed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the workshop, painting the concrete floor in streaks of gold, I watched Dad wipe his hands and head out early. He looked tired, older than usual. Dinner with Gina, he said casually. Don't wait up. Gina, his new girlfriend, younger than Julia, younger than me, even. Mom had cried the day he left. I remember holding her hand as she whispered, He's chasing youth, Clara, let him, but don't chase him anymore. But I did. Every project, every late night, every new client. It was all a way to chase his approval. And then, one dinner would change everything. When Dad called us together a few months later, Julia, me, and Gina, I didn't know that the same pattern from my childhood was about to repeat itself, only this time the ice cream had turned into an entire business. But that's a story for the next part, because what my father did next would make that old pain look like nothing, and it would be the moment I stopped being his daughter and started being my own person. If you've ever grown up being the other child, you know the silence that follows every comparison, the pauses that cut deeper than words. I lived in those pauses for most of my life. Even when my name was printed on the company paperwork as co-founder, I knew what it really meant. Placeholder. Because in my father's eyes, Julia had always been the one destined for bigger things. And me? I was just the one who stayed behind to keep his old dreams alive. Dad used to call Julia my smart girl. He'd introduce her to everyone that way, at parties, weddings, even at the garage. This is my oldest, Julia. She's an accountant at one of the top firms downtown. You know, city life, real businesswoman. Then his tone would shift slightly when he turned to me. And this is Clara. She helps me with the workshop. Helps me. Like I was a volunteer, like I hadn't spent 10 years scaling the business from 2 mechanics to 35. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't in it for validation. But the truth? Every late night, every spreadsheet, every greasy bolt I turned was a plea. See me, Dad. Please. Julia and I had always been opposites, and not in the cute sitcom kind of way. She was polished, sharp, calculating. Her laughter was rehearsed, her apologies selective. I was blunt, loyal to a fault, and carried every emotion like a scar under my skin. When Mom and Dad divorced, Julia sided with him. She said Mom was dramatic and holding him back. I remember the night Mom packed her things. I stood in the kitchen doorway while Julia helped Dad carry boxes into the car. His boxes, not hers. Mom looked at me and whispered, "Don't lose yourself trying to earn their love, Clara." But I didn't listen. I just held her hand until she let go. After the divorce, Dad changed. He became colder, more practical. He still called me to help, still relied on my numbers and management, but something in his tone shifted, like I was an employee, not a daughter. Sometimes I'd hear him on the phone with Julia, laughing, genuinely laughing, and my chest would tighten. One night, he hung up the call and saw me standing in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "You're quiet." "You only laugh like that with her," I blurted before I could stop myself. He looked at me for a long time, and then said the kind of sentence that can split a person's heart neatly in two. "Julia gets me, Clara. You and your mother are emotional." I smiled. The polite kind of smile that hides a storm. But that night, while I was closing up the office, I couldn't help but think, maybe he was right. Maybe being emotional was my downfall. Still, I kept working, because love, for me, had always looked like effort. 5 months after his new marriage to Gina, the calls started coming less often. He began dressing younger, wearing cologne that didn't smell like motor oil anymore. When I came to the workshop, Gina's voice would echo from the office, high, soft, and foreign to the sound of metal. Once I walked in and she was sitting on my desk, twirling my pen. "You must be Clara," she said. "Your dad told me you're like his little assistant." Assistant. That word again. It stung even more coming from her mouth, glossy with lip gloss and confidence. I remember thinking, if only she knew who really built this place. But the real crack came one Friday evening. Dad called me and Julia for dinner at his new house, the one with the big windows and the garden lights that flickered like fairy tales. I'd been there only once. It didn't smell like him anymore. It smelled like lavender and air freshener, like something pretending to be home. We sat around a table too long for 4 people. Gina smiled like a hostess, refilling our glasses while Dad cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot about the business," he began. "I'm getting older, and it's time to start planning for the future." I glanced at Julia. She was scrolling through her phone, unimpressed. "And," he continued, "I've decided the business will go to Julia." The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" My voice was small, but it cracked through the air. He looked calm. Too calm. "Julia has a family, kids to think about. You're not married yet, Clara. You don't have anyone depending on you. It makes more sense for her to take over." I stared at him, the room spinning around the edges. 10 years. 10 years of my life, traded away for someone else's convenience. Julia set her phone down, a small smirk playing on her lips. "Dad, are you sure? I mean, Clara's been running it all this time." "And she still can," Dad interrupted. She'll keep her position, of course, just under Julia's leadership. Under, like a subordinate, like I hadn't built the very floor she was about to stand on. I don't remember much of what happened after, only that the clinking of Gina's fork against her plate felt deafening, and the hum of the refrigerator was louder than my heartbeat. I stood up without finishing my meal. "Congratulations, Julia," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You finally got what you always wanted." Julia blinked. "Clara, it's not personal." "It's always personal," I said. "You just don't feel it." Dad frowned, his voice dropping into that tone he used when I was little. "Don't start, Clara. I've made my decision." I looked at him, the man I'd idolized, the man whose hands I thought I shared. "You already did, a long time ago." Then I walked out, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. Outside, the night air hit me like cold water. The city lights blurred as tears welled in my eyes, but beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred. Quiet and sharp. Not revenge. Not yet. Just realization. He'd taken everything I'd built. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I still had one thing he couldn't take from me. The know-how. And that was going to be enough. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my apartment balcony, staring at the city's orange haze, the hum of cars below blending into my thoughts. Every sound reminded me of something I'd fixed. An engine purring, a wheel alignment clicking into place, my work, my name. But in his eyes, it had never been mine to begin with. By morning, the anger had settled into something colder, a kind of numb determination that felt dangerous. Mom called around 8 a.m., her voice still soft but trembling at the edges. "He told me about last night," she said. "Of course he did," I replied, my tone flat. "Did he tell you why?" "He said it's practical, Clara. Julia has a family. He thinks being single means I don't deserve what I built." There was a pause, then quietly. "You don't have to prove anything to him anymore, sweetheart." But that was the thing. Proving myself had become my oxygen. Without it, I wasn't sure I knew how to breathe. The next few days at the workshop were unbearable. Julia had started visiting more often. Unannounced, uninvited, unashamed. She'd walk in wearing pastel suits and perfume that didn't belong near engine grease. "Dad asked me to familiarize myself with the accounts," she said, tapping her tablet. "Just making sure everything's in order." I wanted to tell her that I was the one who built the accounts, the systems, the client base, that everything she touched had my fingerprints on it. Instead, I just said, "Sure, let me know if you need help." She smiled, that perfect Julia smile that always carried the scent of superiority. "Thanks, Clara. You've always been such a team player." It was like watching someone redecorate your home before you've even finished moving out. That weekend, Dad came by the office early. The sound of his truck door slamming made me flinch. He stepped out in a crisp shirt and cologne that screamed midlife crisis. "Clara," he began, avoiding eye contact. "You've been quiet lately." "Nothing to say," I answered. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was trying to recognize me. Maybe he saw the grease on my hands, the exhaustion in my eyes, and wondered when I'd stopped being his little girl. "Don't take this so personally," he finally said. "You'll still be part of the company, just not in charge," I finished for him. "Not the daughter worth trusting?" His jaw tightened. "You're twisting my words." "No, Dad," I said, stepping closer. "I'm just repeating them out loud." He sighed, frustrated. "Julia has kids to feed. You don't. It's logical." "Logical," I repeated, almost laughing. 10 years of loyalty, logic, and grease. That's what I gave you. And all it took was one dinner for you to erase me." He turned away. "You'll understand when you have a family." "I had one," I whispered. "You broke it." He didn't respond, just walked out, his shadow cutting across the floor I'd cleaned myself. That evening I got a message from Gina, just 3 words. "He's trying, Clara." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because if he was really trying, he wouldn't have undone a decade of effort with one sentence. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an old client, Mr. Turner, owner of a transport company. "Clara, heard a rumor your sister's taking over? That true?" I stared at the message, fingers trembling. I typed back. "Seems that way." "Damn shame. You're the reason we stayed with your company." That last line hit me like a spark to dry wood. I'm the reason. It was the first time someone said it out loud. That day, I drove to Mom's apartment. It still smelled like mint tea and laundry detergent, comfort in its purest form. She looked at me and instantly knew something was shifting. "You've got that look," she said. "What look?" "The same one your father had before he built that first workshop." I sat down, rubbing my temples. "I can't work under Julia, Mom. Not after everything. Mom nodded, her eyes tired but proud. Then don't. He'll say I'm abandoning the family. He already did. I looked at her. She smiled sadly. You have the clients. You have the skill. You don't need their permission. That was the first time I truly considered it. Leaving. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. That night, I stayed at the office long after everyone left. The machines were silent. The only sound was the hum of the neon lights and the quiet ticking of the wall clock. On my desk sat a framed photo. Me, Dad, and Julia at the old workshop. We were smiling, arms around each other. But now, looking closer, I saw it differently. Julia was in the middle, Dad's arm around her. Mine was around his waist, but his hand never reached back. I took a deep breath, flipped the photo face down, and opened a new document on my laptop. Subject: Partnership. Opportunities. Miller Automotive Innovations. If Dad thought I'd crumble, he'd forgotten who taught me how to rebuild engines from nothing. And unlike him, I never left pieces behind. I didn't quit right away. People think decisions like that come in one burst of courage, but they don't. They build quietly, one insult, one dismissive look, one sleepless night at a time. For weeks after that dinner, I showed up every morning, just like before. I handled client calls, signed invoices, and pretended everything was normal. But the air in the workshop had changed. The men avoided eye contact. Gina started showing up with ideas. And Julia, my newly minted boss, strutted around like she'd built the empire herself. Clara, Dad wants me to review the expense reports, she said one day, heels clicking on the concrete. They're already balanced, I replied. Still, it's good for me to understand how things work. That fake politeness, that sugar-coated condescension, every word tasted like rust. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation in Dad's office, his voice, low but sharp. I don't care how she feels, Julia, it's done. A pause. She'll stay. She always stays. He wasn't wrong. For years I had stayed, even when staying meant swallowing resentment until it turned to poison. But something about hearing those words, that smug certainty, lit a fire I didn't know still burned. He thought he knew me. He thought I was still that little girl waiting in the crowd, hoping he'd show up. He was wrong. That night, I drove to Mom's apartment again. She opened the door before I could even knock, like she'd been expecting me. You look like you're carrying a thunderstorm, she said. I sank into the sofa, staring at the floor. He's giving everything to Julia. Every contract, every client. He's rewriting the company's registration papers. He didn't even ask me to sign. Mom's face darkened. He can't just... He already did. For a long moment, we just sat there. The only sound was the kettle whistling in the background. Finally, she said quietly, Then build your own, Clara. I looked up, startled. What? You've done it once. You can do it again. You don't need his last name to make something thrive. You're the one who made that workshop a success. Not him, not Julia. I laughed bitterly. Starting from scratch at 33? Competing with my own family? She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. You're not competing. You're surviving. That word, surviving, hit me like a hammer. I realized she wasn't telling me to fight them. She was telling me to save myself. That night, I stayed in Mom's guest room. Couldn't sleep. The moonlight cut across the wall, illuminating the framed photo of her graduation from nursing school. She'd gone back to get her degree when she was 45. I stared at it and whispered to myself, if she could start over, so can I. The next morning, I woke up early, opened my laptop, and began typing. Miller Performance Motors. Proposal draft. I started listing everything I could bring. Client relationships, staff loyalty, technical innovations. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. By noon, I'd sent out 5 messages to long-term clients, people who trusted me, not the Miller family name. And by evening, 3 of them had replied, Wherever you go, we'll follow. Over the next week, my decision turned into motion. Quietly, strategically, I spoke to suppliers, to technicians, to clients who'd worked directly under my management. I didn't beg or persuade. I just told them the truth, that the business was no longer in my control and that I planned to start fresh. They didn't even hesitate. They knew whose hands kept their engines running. When I finally told Mom, she just smiled. You didn't need his approval after all. I exhaled, the tension finally breaking. He's going to call me disloyal. Let him, she said. Disloyalty to injustice is integrity. I laughed through tears. When did you get so poetic? when I stopped waiting for your father to apologize. We sat there, sipping tea, the kind of silence between us that felt peaceful instead of painful. But the peace didn't last long. 2 days later, Dad called. Clara, what the hell are you doing? What I should have done years ago. You're stealing my clients. They're not yours, I said. They're mine. I earned their trust. Julia told me you've been contacting them. Julia told you because she's losing them, I cut in. There was silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing, heavy, angry, desperate. Then he said the line that froze me. You're tearing this family apart. My throat tightened. You did that the day you handed my life's work to someone else. He tried to speak again, but I hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. By the end of that week, I'd registered my own company. The nameplate on my new office door gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Clara Miller, founder and CEO. It wasn't big, not yet, but it was mine. And as I stood there, breathing in the familiar scent of oil and ambition, I realized something. For years, I had mistaken loyalty for love, but loyalty that only flows one way isn't devotion. It's captivity. And I was finally free. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, in the hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of fresh paint, and the sound of my laptop booting up in an empty office that smelled nothing like the old workshop. The walls were bare, the floors still dusty, but it was mine. For the first time in 10 years, every plan I made wasn't for my father's legacy, it was for my own. The first client who signed with me was Mr. Turner, the same man who had texted after hearing the rumors. He shook my hand firmly and said, You built the system, Clara, not your dad, not your sister. We trust you. That handshake meant more than any award I'd ever won. By the end of the week, 6 more clients followed, then 10, then 20. Emails poured in, polite but firm goodbyes addressed to my father's company, CC'd to my new one. We'll be moving our accounts to Miller Performance Motors under Clara's management. Thank you for the past collaboration. Each message was another nail in the coffin of the empire my father thought was unshakable. Julia called on a Friday afternoon. I didn't answer at first. When she called again, I picked up. You've gone too far, she hissed. I haven't gone far enough, I said calmly. You're destroying Dad's business. I'm not destroying it, Julia. I'm taking back what I built. Clients are leaving by the dozens. Dad's furious. Good, I said. Maybe he'll finally understand what it feels like to lose something you worked for. She exhaled sharply, her tone trembling between anger and fear. Do you hate us that much? No, I said softly. If I did, I would have stayed and watched it rot from the inside. Then I hung up. For the next few weeks, I worked 16-hour days. I signed in leases, recruited old mechanics who trusted me, negotiated supplier deals, and personally met every new client who came aboard. My palms were blistered again from working the shop floor. My nails were chipped, my eyes tired, but the exhaustion felt honest. One night, as I wiped the last bit of oil off my hands, my phone buzzed. It was Eli, my boyfriend. He'd been patient through all of this, even when I barely answered his calls. You're still at the shop? He asked. I live here now, I joked. I know, he said quietly, but I miss you. There was a pause, that comfortable kind of silence that only happens when someone truly knows you. You're building something incredible, he said. Just don't forget to build a life around it, too. I smiled. I won't, not this time. When the call ended, I leaned against the workbench, the hum of the machines echoing around me. He was right. I wasn't just building a business, I was rebuilding myself. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Within a month, my father's company, once thriving, was bleeding clients. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. I didn't gloat. But I won't lie, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing the truth had finally found its way home. Every mechanic who joined me told the same story. Julia doesn't understand the numbers. She spends more time on video calls than on the floor. She's cutting corners. And my father, the man who once bragged about her sharp mind, now spent his days putting out fires she couldn't control. 2 months later, I received a message from an unknown number. Dad, you've made your point. Now stop. You're embarrassing this family. I stared at the text for a long time before typing back. No, Dad, I'm saving the family name, the part you forgot to protect. He didn't reply. The following week, one of the last big clients left his company, a fleet management group that accounted for nearly 30% of their revenue. I didn't have to recruit them. They came to me on their own. The same day, one of the old workers, Luis, walked into my office. He'd worked for my dad since before I was born. He looked uneasy, holding his cap in his hands. "Clara," he said quietly, "your father's been asking everyone not to join you. Says you're out for revenge." "Do you believe that?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I believe you're doing what he should have done, treating people right." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. He nodded, eyes glassy. "Then we're with you." That day, 10 more employees resigned from my father's workshop. By sunset, they were setting up their new tools in mine. The sound of hammers, the clang of wrenches, the scent of metal, it all came alive again. It wasn't vengeance anymore, it was rebirth. Word spread quickly. Trade magazines began writing short blurbs about Miller Performance Motors, the rising independent led by a young female founder. And for the first time, people weren't referring to me as Nom's daughter, just Clara Miller. Every time I saw my name in print, my heart tightened, not with pride, but relief. Because I was finally standing alone, unshadowed. One evening, Mom came to visit the new workshop. She walked slowly, her hand brushing against the steel tables, smiling faintly. "It feels different," she said. "Cleaner?" I teased. "No," she chuckled softly. "It feels alive." I nodded. "Because it finally has a heart." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes glistening. "I wish your father could see this," she said. "He can," I replied. "He just won't." Mom sighed. "He's too proud." "So am I said. "But the difference is I earned mine." That night, when everyone left, I turned off the lights and stood in the quiet dark. I could almost hear my younger self, that 12-year-old girl clutching her award, whispering, "He didn't show up." I smiled softly and whispered back, "It's okay, I did." Because I finally understood something my father never did. When loyalty burns you down to ashes, the only way to survive is to rise. The message came from Julia at 2:17 a.m. "Dad's losing it. He says you've ruined everything. Please pick up." I stared at the glowing screen in the dark, the blue light washing over the ceiling, the hum of the fan cutting through silence. Ruined everything. That phrase made me laugh, bitter, quiet, exhausted. I didn't pick up, because it wasn't me who ruined everything. It was him. The man who couldn't see the difference between building something for his family and taking it from his family. By morning, the industry grapevine was buzzing. Rumors said the old Miller workshop had lost 2 major suppliers and several key contracts. Julia had botched a deal by quoting outdated prices, and Dad was scrambling to fix it. I tried not to care, but hearing their downfall felt like reopening a wound I thought I'd cauterized. When I drove past the old lot, I couldn't help slowing down. The big blue sign that once read, "Miller and Daughters Auto Services," now flickered faintly, one letter shorted out. The parking lot was half empty. Through the glass, I could see Dad pacing, phone pressed to his ear. Even from across the street, he looked smaller. It should have made me feel victorious. But instead, my chest ached with something closer to pity. 2 weeks later, Mom called. "He came to see me," she said quietly. "Oh." He looked lost. Said he's behind on payments. Gina left him. That name again. Gina. The young wife who thought she was marrying security, not a sinking ship. She drained half his accounts, Mom added. Said she was done playing house with a man who can't afford her lifestyle. I didn't say anything. I could hear the distant sound of rain through Mom's phone, a lonely rhythm behind her voice. "He asked if you'd consider coming back." I laughed, not cruelly, just disbelieving. "Coming back to what?" "To help. He says he wants to rebuild as a family." The irony burned in my throat. For years, that word, family, had been his excuse for everything. Favoritism? Family. Neglect? Family. Inheritance theft? Still family. Now he used it as a life raft, as if he could pull me back with it. "Mom," I said quietly, "tell him I already built my family. It just doesn't include him." The following days blurred into one another. Work at my company was booming. New clients, new partnerships, steady growth. But beneath the success, there was something else, a heaviness I couldn't shake. Eli noticed it first. "You've been distant," he said one evening as we closed up the office together. "I'm fine." "You're not," he said gently. "You think success should have erased the pain. It doesn't. It just changes the shape of it." I looked at him, half smiling. "When did you become so wise?" "When I started loving a woman who carries her past like a battle scar." I wanted to argue, but instead I let him pull me into his arms. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to be strong, just human. A few days later, Julia called again. This time I answered. Her voice cracked the moment she spoke. He's selling the business, Clara. I figured. He said he has no choice. The debts, they're everywhere. Silence. Then, why are you telling me this, Julia? Because I can't watch him fall apart. Not completely. He's still our dad. I took a deep breath. You know what the difference is, Julia. You always wanted his approval. I just wanted his respect. And you got it, in the worst way possible. Her voice broke then, and for a moment, she didn't sound like my rival. She just sounded like my sister. Do you ever think about fixing it? She asked. Every day, I said softly, but sometimes fixing something broken just cuts your hands open again. We didn't say goodbye, we just hung up, both knowing the silence said everything. Weeks passed. Then one night, my phone buzzed with another unknown number. It was a message from Dad. Clara, please, just come for dinner. No business talk, just family. I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it, but something in the phrasing, just family, tugged at a part of me that still remembered being 12 years old, holding that certificate, waiting for him to show up. Eli found me sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand. You're going to go, aren't you? I don't know, I said. You do, he smiled gently, because you don't run from closure. He was right, I didn't, but I also didn't chase it anymore. That Saturday, I drove to Dad's house, not the new one he'd shared with Gina, but the old place. The moment I walked in, the air felt heavy. Dust on the furniture, faded photos on the walls. At the dining table sat Dad and Julia, both looking like they'd aged a decade in a few months. Clara, Dad said, his voice rough, you came. You asked, I replied simply. We ate in silence for a while. The clinking of silverware filled the space where affection used to live. Then he finally spoke. I made mistakes. The words hung there, fragile, uncertain. You did, I said quietly. He nodded, swallowing hard. I thought I was doing what was best for the family. Julia had kids, responsibilities. And I didn't? I interrupted. I had responsibilities too, Dad. You just didn't think they mattered. He looked down at his plate. I didn't realize I was pushing you away. You didn't push me away, I said. You erased me. Julia's voice was barely above a whisper. He's trying, Clara. I turned to her, and I'm tired of trying for him. Dad looked up, eyes watery, shoulders slumped. Can you forgive me? I hesitated. The little girl in me wanted to say yes. The woman I'd become, the one who built her own empire from the ashes of loyalty, couldn't lie anymore. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, Dad, I said, and I've worked too hard to remember who I am. I stood up, placing my napkin gently on the table. I'll always be your daughter, but I'll never be your shadow again. Then I left. No shouting, no tears, just the quiet finality of a door closing behind me. When I got home, Eli was waiting on the porch, holding a small velvet box. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, searching my face. You did it, he whispered. I let go, I corrected. He smiled. Then maybe it's time to hold on to something else. When he opened the box, I saw the ring. Simple, elegant, exactly me. I didn't even let him kneel. I just took his hand and said, yes, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to choose me. I had already chosen myself. When I walked out of my father's house that night, the air outside felt weightless. For years, I'd imagined this moment, leaving on my own terms, not out of anger, but peace. Yet as the cold air hit my face, I realized peace doesn't arrive with applause. It comes quietly, in the absence of noise. For the first time in my life, I wasn't someone's daughter, or employee, or disappointment. I was just Clara Miller, the woman who rebuilt what was broken and walked away before it could break her again. The weeks that followed blurred into something gentler. Mom visited often, always bringing tea and gossip from the neighborhood. Eli moved some of his things into my apartment, though he joked that the smell of engine oil would haunt his shirts forever. The new company was thriving, busier than ever. But this time, I learned to stop living inside the chaos. We hired more staff, delegated more tasks. I even took a weekend off, my first in 5 years. One Saturday afternoon, I sat in my workshop after everyone had gone home. The evening sun spilled across the concrete floor, catching dust in gold ribbons. For a moment, I just watched the light flicker over the hood of an old car I'd been restoring. It was a 1968 Mustang, the same model my father once spent months fixing when I was a child. Back then, I'd hand him tools, hoping he'd smile and say, "Good job, kid." He never did. Now I ran my fingers over the polished metal and whispered, "Look, Dad, I finished it." A few days later, I got a letter, a real one, handwritten, smudged at the edges. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, familiar. It was from my father. "Clara, I don't expect you to come back, and I won't ask again. I just wanted to tell you that I sold the business, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The debts were mine to pay, not yours to carry. Julia's gone back to accounting. I think she'll be happier there. As for me, I've taken a small job consulting for another garage. Feels strange, but honest work never bothered me. You were right. I didn't see you for who you were until it was too late, but I see it now. Every client that left, every success you've built, that was all you. I was proud, but never proud enough to say it. Don't come to see me out of pity. Just live well. That will be enough. Dad." I read it 3 times. The words weren't poetic, but they were human, raw in a way he'd never been. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of him. Just understanding. He had been raised to believe love was ownership. I had learned that love was freedom. And maybe both of us had been wrong and right in our own ways. That weekend, I drove to the hill behind my workshop, the one that overlooked the city lights. Eli joined me, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you've been somewhere else all day," he said. "I got a letter from my dad." "Oh." "He said he's proud of me." Eli smiled. "That's something." I nodded, watching the lights flicker in the distance. "Yeah, it's late, but it's enough." We sat in silence for a while. The wind tugged at my hair, carrying the faint scent of rain. It smelled like beginnings. A few months later, we got married. Small ceremony, no big speeches, just laughter and music. Mom cried, of course. Julia came too, quiet but smiling. She hugged me afterward and whispered, "You did what I couldn't. You stood your ground." I squeezed her hand. "We both learned, didn't we?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "He asked me to tell you he watched the wedding online. He didn't want to ruin it by being there." That made me laugh softly. It was so him, proud, guilty, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. A few days after the wedding, I stopped by his new garage. He didn't know I was coming. When I walked in, he was under a car, hands covered in grease, just like the old days. He rolled out, blinking in surprise. "Clara?" I smiled. "Just checking if you're still the best mechanic in town." For a second, his expression softened. Not regretful, just grateful. "You've done good, kid." "So have you." We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. Sometimes silence is all the closure you get, and all the closure you need. Months passed, seasons changed, and life began to settle into something almost ordinary. Eli and I ran the business together. Mom retired and started tending her garden again, and every once in a while I'd stop by Dad's small garage with a box of parts or a new tool set, leaving it by the door before he noticed. He never mentioned it, but sometimes I'd find a note waiting for me on my desk the next day. "Thanks. The Mustang runs smoother now. D." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that some bridges don't have to be rebuilt. They can just stand quietly, with gaps where light can still pass through. One night, after closing up the workshop, I looked at the glowing sign above the entrance. Miller Performance Motors. No and daughters, no and sons. Just my name, my work, my legacy. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood in the parking lot under the fading sunset. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to inherit anything. I'd already created everything I was meant to. And as the wind carried the faint sound of an engine starting somewhere in the distance, I smiled. Because I knew, somewhere out there, my father had finally learned to be proud. In silence.